Hello and welcome, everyone. This week we are focusing on heart health, and my good friend and sometimes someone who makes me a little bit
It was an accident.
Dr. Conor Brady from Ireland, from Dogs First, is joining me. He wrote the book Feeding Dogs, which if you haven't read it, man, you need to get that. Especially if you're one of those sciencey or science people and you want all of the studies to back up all the things that we say every day, Feeding Dogs is the book that references. How many studies are referenced in there? It's got to be thousands.
1,200 at the moment. There's another
there you go.
50, 60 going in. Because it's print on demand, you know what? I'm bringing it in. I'm going to update it. I'm going to update it. I'm just going to say, guys, it's updated now because...
Well, dang, I'm going to have to get another copy then.
There you go. Put my kids through college. Thanks, Judy. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Anyway, so because Dr. Conor has done so much delving into the research, we thought he was a great person to reach out to talk about DCM, which is dilated cardiomyopathy. And I don't even remember how many years ago, it's been at least 5 years ago, that the whole DCM debacle, as I like to call it, was thrown out there. And FDA literally, with zero evidence, threw out for social media, which is why I don't get why they don't, why this particular one, they said, let's throw this out there. And then, people can be complaining about sick animals for months and they're like, oh, we don't see anything. Anyway, that's a different topic. But FDA literally threw a bunch of companies under the bus and said that grain-free foods, which encompasses any food that doesn't have grain in it. So that's going to be our raw feeding people who almost all of them do not feed any kind of grains. I don't feed any grains to my animals. It includes foods that use a different starch. So potatoes, peas, legumes, tapioca, whatever they're using. So if it doesn't have a grain in it and some other starch form is being used to make the food, or other carbohydrate form is being used to make the food, they basically made a statement based on just a few over 500 DCM cases that were reported by cardiologists. And in those 500 animals, they didn't even take out those who were genetically predisposed, like Great Danes and Dobermans and Cocker Spaniels and Irish Wolfhounds. So if we go back and we take all of those breeds out, we're down to a couple of hundred animals. And they thought that was appropriate to make this far-reaching, broad statement, which for some reason, the veterinary cardiologists and traditional veterinarians, they latched onto this thing like white on rice. They have not let it go.
No, that was the most shared. The article that we'll get to eventually at the end of this chat was the most shared canine nutritional article ever. 80,000 shares on an article on a journal piece, which is unheard of on any journal. Nobody really reads the studies like that. 80,000 shares in 6 months, making it one of the most read studies ever. The veterinary industry lapped it up. And when you think about it, these DCM cases, dilated cardiomyopathy, this heart issue, this is in a country where they estimate there's about maybe 500,000 to 1 million cases of DCM a year, nearly 1% of the US dog population, 90 million dogs. So up to 1% of pets can be walking around with this. And as Judy said, absolutely there's a genetic component to it. Some breeds seem to be more affected. And a vast majority of the rest is down to probably nutritional explanation. And so there was if people go back a little bit, in the 1970s, we had a massive scandal, in pet food in the US. It didn't happen over here. And the pet food companies had essentially stopped putting meat in dry pet food. There was just no need for it. Pets don't eat meat. And what happened was, in meat are many essential things that they don't tell you about, like, carnosine and creatine and glucosamine, chondroitin, all those things you don't get in dry pet food. But one critical one, particularly for the cats, was taurine. And so taurine, from the Latin for bull, that's where you get it from. There's tiny plant sources of taurine, but very hard to absorb. It's not where you get it. If you're a cat or a dog, if you're a meat eater, you need lots of it. So you need to eat meat, red meat particularly. So when you stop putting meat in dry food, you get no taurine. And when you get no taurine, you get huge issues from DCM, massive eye issues. Thousands, up to tens of thousands of dogs and cats died in the 70s in the US alone during this scandal. And that was why AFCO was created. Initially, the NRC, the FDA, when they used to work on behalf of the public, they had the NRC and they said, NRC, what's going on with the tens of thousands of pets dying? And they investigate the dry foods and they say, there's no taurine in this food and the animals are dying. And so the NRC was created this pet food section, which eventually was taken over by AFCO in the 80s and 90s, which is pet food producers. So the pet food producers guard pet food now, but it used to be FDA NRC. So the whole creation of AFCO, this nonsensical pretense of a regulation body that we have today, was created because of DCM, and it was created because of cereal-based dry foods, tens of thousands of cases in cereal-based dry foods. So my question is, this is clearly the scandal that started it off, and then they started putting in taurine in food because cats need taurine, and so people think cats need extra taurine, so well, cats just need meat, and then they're fine. So I always say, like, today vets are going around saying that, it's grain-free pet foods is causing DCM, therefore you've got to feed them grain. And I'll say, let's pretend that's true. What is it in grain that's good for hearts? Go. And you'll wait for their response, and they'll fiddle around with some nonsensical thing. They might say something like plant oils, as if refined plant oils are good for hearts, totally out the window now. And they won't come up with anything. If anything, you would say grains are bad for hearts. All this, lots of carbs, more prone to obesity, and plant things like goitrogens and phytic acid and all the stuff you can't absorb. I mean, what is it that's good for hearts? And they can't tell you. And the point is, 50 years ago, this was all grain-free pet food. So if grain was protective for heart health, it wouldn't have happened in grain-free pet food. The issue is taurine. And so it's not just a lack of taurine in pet foods, which all pet foods suffer from today, because 3-4% bone meal is all you need to put in. If it says with beef or with chicken, it's 4% bone meal. They used to call it meat and bone meal. Now they call it meat meal or dehydrated meat for bone meal, the stuff we put in the garden. So there's not a lot of taurine in that, so they supplement it. But there's a lot of other problems why taurine can't be absorbed. You need methionine and cysteine. They're the precursors for taurine. And lots of studies, lots of recalls have shown that foods are often deficient in methionine. It doesn't like being processed. So dry food suffers from a lack of methionine, which means you don't get taurine. Also, they're too high in fiber, particularly the low-fat dry foods, which are full of fiber, which stops bile acids being reabsorbed, which is how the animal keeps circulating the taurine in its body. So there's a number of reasons why any pet food, grain-free pet food, cereal-based pet food, they can all have the problem as long as they don't have taurine or methionine or too much fiber, on and on. But in essence, at the heart of it, is a taurine deficiency. And so any pet food can have it. But here is the FDA saying they had 500 cases, which they didn't show the companies. They didn't show test results. They didn't tell them what was wrong with the foods. And they named the companies before the companies had a chance to look at the foods. The companies looked at their foods. They didn't find any problems. No problems popped up in the EU. No more than 500 mysterious cases that nobody could see were ever popped up. I mean, grain-free pet food is 50% of the dry pet food market in the US. 50%. And if grain-free pet food was causing DCM, don't you think more cases would have been found by the ever-intrepid FDA?
One would think that, if that's 50% of what's being fed, we should have millions of cases of DCM being reported, not 500.
No, you'd find plenty more cases, plenty more examples. And what else stinks about this, and there's lots more, it gets very, very dark in a while, but this is the least dark it's going to be, guys, so buckle up. But, if anybody remembers the melamine scandal when dry pet food killed tens more thousands of cats and dogs, and in essence, it was an adulterated rice and protein source from Asia, and they were putting melamine in it, which will kill you dead. And it's still going on today, by the way, this issue. And tens of thousands of cats and dogs were dying of melamine, this scandal in 2006. And the FDA had to be dragged by Congress to name the dry pet food companies who were still selling dry food with melamine in it. They knew who the companies were, and they wouldn't name it. And a congressman, I can't remember his name, had to step in and go, you're going to get in big trouble if you don't tell us the names of these companies. They told us the names of the companies, and the pet owners could avoid them. Compare that 2006 FDA being dragged into the light with tens of thousands of cats and dogs dead to this latest scandal with 500 suspected cases that nobody could see, no recalls issued, found no issues with products, and they named those companies straight away. I'm not going to name them again because I'm not going to do them the extra favor. But there's a lot of nonsense that supported that decision, I think. They hired you'd call them, they're white coats. They're guns for hire. And they rolled out the same 3 or 4 white coat veterinary kind of scientists to churn out a paper. And they churned out a couple of papers to suggest that these beg diets, they call them, cause DCM. And those studies did not show that at all. Mansilla in 2019 showed there's absolutely no link to these diets. It may be that someone will prove someday that legumes are bad for heart health and pets, but it hasn't been shown yet in the literature. It's just a nonsense that these studies showed it. But they used these 2 fake studies, not fake studies, but misleading kind of studies to push the DCM myth. And that was the end of it. It annihilated DCM or grain-free pet food sales. They did a great job in killing the growth. I think grain-free pet food was growing at 10% a year, which is huge sales growth. And in the year this DCM scandal came out, it flatlined to 0%, not to 0.3% growth. So it did exactly what it was supposed to do, which was slow the growth of grain-free pet food, because the FDA and Big Pet Food want to sell rotten grain and the dregs of the meat industry to you, which is cereal-based pet food, in my opinion. So I think it's quite dark, and there's more to it, but I'm going to pause for a breath. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we can fast forward in 2020, end of 2022, FDA very quietly put a statement on that original post right at the top that says, to date, there is no evidence that grain-free foods have any link to dilated cardiomyopathy. Now, did they post that and have that go viral? Did they post it on social media? Did they send letters to veterinarians?
Veterinary journals?
No.
Yeah.
No, it was just very quietly. Chance. And if you weren't going on there looking for it, you would never find that. Now, what's really interesting is very recently, there was a crazy woman, and I'm just going to call her that because she called me enough names that I can call her that, and I'm not even going to say who she is. But she posted a 3-page blog about dilated cardiomyopathy very recently. So here we are, like 5 years after the original thing, saying that I don't know anything that I'm talking about. I cherry pick which studies I want to believe, and that DCM related to grain-free food is real, and I am completely wrong.
Yeah.
Here we are 5 years later.
That is just, and there's no evidence is needed when they make people make statements like that. They just believe the nonsense still. They're poorly researched, poorly read, but they're high in emotion. And anybody that, do you know what? The emptiest pots make the most noise. And it's a fact online.
I like that.
They're so, it's the people like that get so aggressive online with their beliefs. Because if your position is taken in dogma, you defend it with emotion and BS. You don't, if your position is taken in science and honesty and truth, and somebody highlights something that's wrong, you go, oh, I didn't know. Grain's actually protective of heart health. I would tell the world. I want pet owners listening to me, how their dogs can be healthy and cats can be healthy. I'm not going to lead them wrong. I hope. And if it does, I'd put my hands up, because I'm not trying to, I've no agenda. But did you know what? When the FDA put up that statement, did you know that they put up that statement 1 month after Mars bought Champion? Champion, for anyone that doesn't know, makes Origin, and Origin is the most successful and one of the most highly regarded back in the day grain-free pet foods out there. So Mars...
Well, it was until FDA made the initial statement and threw them under the bus, and their sales dropped by 30%.
Now, I would say, if I was Mars, that would have been a great time to buy Champion. That's just me throwing out a little bit of conspiracy, but it's like, a month after Mars buy grain-free pet food and are now the owners of the most successful grain-free pet food, the FDA call off the witch hunt and say, oh yeah, do you remember that kind of little scandal? Don't worry about that anymore. I mean, a month after the biggest candy company buys the biggest grain-free pet food, now grain-free pet food doesn't cause DCM. After pushing it, I would say they got that for a snip, because I know Champion were looking for $2 billion, but because Mars is a family-owned business, they don't have to declare their figures. So you don't know what they bought it for, but it was a snip of what Origin would have been worth 4 years before their little FDA-led kind of collusion. There was a bit, there's a guy over there, Daniel Shuloff owns Keto Pet. He's a owner of a grain-free pet food company. And without getting into the reads, but one of these big articles, this big study came out. What did she call it? Lisa Freeman is this lady, and Lisa Freeman is a vet, and Lisa Freeman previously wrote the current knowledge of the risks and benefits of raw meat-based diets for dogs and cats in 2013. Very well shared article. You can imagine it was all risk and very little benefit. And I would have been screaming at the time, this is terribly unfair. There's no benefits in here at all. So Lisa Freeman works for Royal Canin Hills Pet Food and declares that she's no problem saying she will take any big dry pet foods company and produce articles and studies. And so she was hired along with Stern and Aiden. Okay, three kind of names that I would know very well when you want to produce some evidence to back it up. And the article they wrote for the DCM and Dog Zone, the one that was shared 80,000 times, was called DCM and Dogs, What Do We Know? Okay, so what do we know? So they're really important words. What do we know? That indicates that you've got some serious evidence, okay? And this study wasn't peer-reviewed and it wasn't published. It was in a journal as an editor's piece, a commentary piece. So people believed it was a study, but it wasn't. It wasn't peer-reviewed because it wouldn't have got through peer review. And just to call it, I wrote a big extensive piece on DCM, which I'll share later if anybody wants it. But this guy, Daniel Shuloff, is a lawyer. He owns Keto Pet Sanctuary, and he was looking through what they wrote. And Daniel was furious because he thought this is going to be terrible for the sales of my company, which I've spent years building up. And so Daniel Shuloff, a lawyer by trade, took them and the FDA to court, and that's going on. And here's some of the bits that they were talking about the hatchet job on this piece, some of the issues he had. Lisa Freeman states, over the past few years, an increasing number of DCM cases involving dogs appear to have been related to diet, but they provided zero evidence for that. Zero studies, zero facts. They repeatedly implicate grain-free diets with DCM and dogs without using a single reference. That's why it doesn't get through peer review, because you can't say that without studies. They rely heavily on two unpublished studies. This article had two unpublished studies. The studies were by them, hadn't been published yet. They said two studies are coming that make an association, and the two studies were found to not make the association. They didn't test for methionine, cysteine, taurine, fiber, all that kind of stuff. And the article wasn't peer-reviewed and whatnot. So that's in the courts. And Shuloff is saying, you kill the sales of my pet food company because of this nonsensical study or this article. And I have a piece that your guy is going to put up as I'm speaking. It's a little image I wanted to show you. That a year after this nonsensical piece came out that the vets all bought hook, line and sinker, and as you said, the vet journals share it very well. They love jumping on board, as did New York Times, Washington Post, and all the other guys that, work in that field. And they push this DCM thing very, very hard. But as you said, when the truth comes out, they don't push that at all. But this little team of scientists tried once more to produce another piece on how grain-free pet foods cause DCM. This was about 2 years after the previous nonsense there. And this one, by this time, there was too much pressure on the journals not to publish the nonsense about it because it wasn't true. And they tried in PLOS, which is an online way of publishing your studies. And they tried to go to print with this nonsensical piece on DCM and grain-free pet food, which would have been laughable as much as their last one. And this time, PLOS actually took action and said, you know what, we're going to stop publishing your stuff. And so PLS wrote back to them. And as the slide's going to pop up here, and this is called, your conflicts of interest. And when you write a study, the authors of the study have to write their conflicts of interest at the bottom. Who do you work for? Who's paying you? Because as you know, if you work for a pharmaceutical company and you produce a study, the drug works. That's how it works. So you can see the before is Fischetti was the lead author in this time. And she said her only conflict of interest is that she is employed by the Amino Acid Laboratory in the University of California, Davis, UCD. And we thought that sounds harmless enough. There's no pet food companies and there's no conflicts of interest here. PLOS, the journal, got back to them and said, because of the pressure from the likes of Shuloff and the lawsuits and everything else, they said, okay, guys, you're going to have to fix that conflicts of interest statement because you're all working for dry food companies. And in the after bit, you can see I've highlighted in red all the admissions on their behalf. Once they're forced to do it, Fischetti receives remuneration for lectures or as an advisor on behalf of Nestle Purina Pet Care. Forgot to mention that the first time. Mars Pet Care, forgot it again. Mark Morris, which is your science diet, and Pet Food Institutes. She just didn't mention that the first time in her conflicts of interest statement. She also received funding from Neuter for graduate student training, which we all hoped wasn't going on in UCD, but of course now we know it is. The Veterinary Medical Teaching Hospital at UC Davis receive funding from Royal Canin. What? I don't know. They didn't tell us. From Nestle Purina. They'll take money from anyone. And on and on and on. So that conflicts of interest tells you all you need to know. They didn't put that on it the first time, but they were, once forced by the journal and the pressure from the public and people that own grain-free pet foods. You would hope that the journal would just do that anyway, or the FDA would control this. But it's just a pure, it's cowboys and Indians. It really is. It's so annoying. It really annoys me, and it sullies science because you don't know who to believe. And the vets will believe the nonsensical study forever because they don't read this and they don't read the aftermath, because they don't read anybody else's opinion. They'll just stick with the nonsense that the Veterinary Journal told them 5 years ago, and they still today promote grain as good for heart health. It's so wrong. It's so wrong, I'm going red in the face. I'm so annoyed. Bloody hell. I have more.
Okay. Yeah. That's good. The thing is, unfortunately, for the average pet owner, you go into the veterinary office and the person standing there on the other side of the table in the white coat is telling you, no, we have strong evidence that supports that you must have grains in the diet. Wait, what? Because you really don't. And what you're giving us, thankfully, is I love having somebody who loves all the researchy, sciencey stuff because it makes my head spin. But they haven't looked at this with a critical eye. It's just they get an email from a pet food company that says, "Oh, we have strong evidence." There's no link to that strong evidence or the scientific studies, but we're just supposed to take this and run with it and increase the sales of bags of food in our clinics.
They could, and you know what? They could link to studies, as they did with them when the assistance dogs over in the US was trying to feed real food to their pets, to the great benefit of that pet. I mean, it was, as Brisbane guide dogs showed, decreased orthopedic surgery and consult, decreased skin conditions, saved themselves 82% on their vet bills in a population of 220 dogs. Can you imagine, for a charity, what they could do with that extra money? But all that aside, that's just anecdotal. They didn't publish their results, as some people will tell you. But so the assistance dogs in the US saw that and thought, we want our dogs longer on the streets because they're so valuable to the clients. Let's feed them fresh food. And of course, the whichever group it was, not WASAVA, but the American Veterinary Medical Association, AVMA, came out with a statement and said, dry or raw dog food has caused lots of sickness in humans. This was in 2014-15, and at that case there was 0 cases of raw dog food.
I was going to say, where are those studies? Because I've never seen that. Yeah. From 2006 to 2016, 0 humans have been infected. In that time, 132 humans were infected by dry pet food, were food poisoned by dry pet food, didn't quite make their peace. Half them toddlers under 2 years of age, over 4 different outbreaks, didn't quite make the peace from the FDA and whatnot. But so AVMA cut off fresh food for these, and they cited 4 studies in support of their statement that it causes sickness in humans. It has been found to cause sickness in humans. And in those 4 studies, one was about pig's ears and something else, which isn't raw dog food. One was about cats that specifically said it definitely didn't find any cases. And 2 said, we found some bacteria in raw dog food, therefore it may cause disease in humans. So the thing is, vets are given this article from an authoritative source, and then they see 4 studies underneath, and the vast majority don't read those studies. And those that do get to the top bit of it and read and go, oh, okay, but they're not taking in any of the evidence. So the 4 studies they used, all 4 were classic examples of what not to publish. I mean, that shows nobody's been infected by raw dog food. So it's the same with this DCM scandal. They can say, look, these 2 studies that were pre-published, that they published themselves, that not published themselves, but they're pre-published, they hadn't gone to print. They could just put them at the bottom of a piece and a vet will feel a warm hug when they see that science. But they don't feel the same warm hug when they go to the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society and get their positional statement, which has 100 references in it going, this is why we feed real food, this is why it's safe. Those studies don't give you a warm hug. So we're all guilty of that, but this particular instance has 0 scientific evidence behind it. No one's going to show you a study of any value bar the 2 nonsensical ones produced by this team of hitmen.
they're not going to show any evidence. So but it's done the job to slow down the growth of grain-free pet food. That's it. That's a fact. It has done the job.
Do you know, since because it wasn't that long ago, so we might not have statistics, but do we know how much the sales of the Origin and Akana, the champion foods, how much they've gone up since being purchased by Mars?
No, I haven't checked.
It might be interesting to see.
That's a good idea.
Because we know how much it went down when the hip piece came out. But it would, and I know that their sales didn't rebound before they were bought out. I know their sales did not rebound to what they had been before. Yeah. So I'm gonna stick you on that research, finding out okay, how much did it rebound from the original article that came out to when it was sold? Because the owners of that company, I mean, they took a huge hit. And, not that I love the company, but I did love the company actually 10 years ago when they were still in Canada. Yes. When they moved to the US, everything went.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but it would be interesting to see how much did they rebound before they were bought.
We can't find out. We can't find out because Mars don't publish their figures. They're a family-run business, and they, family-run. And so they just give you very vague. They what their turnover is. It's more money than God, but they don't break it down into their sections. Like, for example, Mars owns 50,000 veterinary health professionals in the US, not just vets, but nurses and staff and whatnot. 50,000 in the US alone are paid by Mars Inc. Now, why would Mars Inc., the guys that make the pet food, want to control the health issues that may result from eating the wrong food? But you don't get those figures either. So you don't really know, and you'll never know how much Origin is now. The days of knowing exactly pound for pound, kilo by kilo, you won't get it. So that's actually the answer. I'd waste my time trying to find that.
Okay,
pity. I would say it's taken a serious haircut because people don't trust Mars. They don't trust candy companies with the health of their pets, and I would say that's probably a good decision. They've got woeful reputations for adequate health in humans. I mean, you know what I mean? You don't run to a bloody Nestle vending machine for your kids. I mean, you do it now and again, but you go, oh, I got to get a salad into this kid soon because she's got a birthday party and she's eating junk, People often say, look, why, there's another little angle to this. Why are the FDA involved in this? Okay, it's not like Mars and Nestle, some of the biggest donors to FDA, and we all know, pharma pays the regulators for a reason, and pet food do that too. Okay, so there's definitely a lot of money involved, and so the FDA is, as I say, it's a guard dog, but it's been deballed and it's sound asleep. So that is the FDA at the moment. But I'd like to put another little slant on this, and I would say the reason the FDA and big pet food want to keep pushing grain is because the US produces huge amounts of wheat and corn, huge amounts. It's an enormously important part of your agricultural system. Has been. The corn became the biggest kind of thing in the 1970s, which is why pet food started containing corn, because it was the cheapest calorie you can get in there. So it's not because they need grain. They don't need grain. Dogs statistically, or like scientific fact, have zero need for carbohydrates. There's no need for grain. There's nothing in grain.
Even AFCO says that. No need for carbohydrates.
Yeah, but
zero.
They need grain. Hang on, how do I marry these two things? But so I would say, first of all, you produce huge amounts of grain, and that grain has a lot of waste. Okay, you just can't help it. Orders don't get taken and whatnot, and we know a lot of grain goes into pet food. So it's a nice.
Or it's contaminated with so much mold that we can't put it in the human food industry.
Yes, you can transport, indeed. Did you see, guys, just for fun, Google Mars Pet Food Factory phosphine gas lawsuit. Just Google that and have a look. I don't even need to tell you. But I mean, you think phosphine gas, for those that don't know, is a highly poisonous, toxic gas that they used to kill people in the Second World War. It is awful, okay? Now, phosphine gas has no business being in the same town as a food factory, let alone in the factory. And the Mars workers suing, or the Mars staff were suing Mars because there was phosphine gas alarms in the pet food factory. Now, people might say, why would you need alarms for phosphine gas? Because it's alleged phosphine gas is used to kill the mold on the grain when it comes in the door. I shouldn't laugh, but grain can be transported to pet food companies with no top. You don't have to, grain for humans has to be totally in these silos and covered over. It's highly toxic when it gets moldy, and it's dying to get moldy. It loves getting moldy. And as soon as a little bit of mold is found, the whole thing is to be dumped. Not so in pet food. So mycotoxins is a top killer of pets. It's one of the highest causes for recalls. Lots of studies, 120 dogs in Texas, 80 dogs there. It's a big problem. So grain's one thing, but the other thing is that the US eats a ton of meat. Okay, so when you get a cow, 50% of her is of value to the human food sector, and the other 50%, head, spine, frame, some of the organ bits, stomach, intestines. They are of less value to the human food industry, and that is considered waste, as is all the 4D meat, dead, diseased, dying, disabled meat, as is leftover restaurant grease, roadkill, put to sleep cats and dogs. So in some rendering plants. So now all this meat waste goes to renderers, and they can stew up this stuff. Some cats and dogs can be. SPB is the second most likely reason dry pet food will be recalled in the US. Salmonella is number one. What? SPB is number two. Okay. Where does sodium pentobarbital come from? In the food chain. It's used for euthanizing cats and dogs and some horses, I assume, but you're the vet, Judy. You can correct me on all that. Yeah, so the point is, you've horses. Actually got 50 billion tons of meat waste, 4D estimated. You guys go through about 50 billion kilos, 50 billion kilos of meat a year, and I think the same amount of waste. So the problem is the industry has huge amounts of meat waste. So if you're producing meat, you need to sell the meat waste somewhere. You can't just dump it, because if you dump it, it's a cost. And we all want burgers for 20p or 20 cents. We want McDonald's burgers for €1. We don't want to pay any more money for that. That's why we have animals confined in horrible situations, crap quality meat. We want it as cheap as possible. So this is what we end up with, this horrible beef in some situations. So we have all this meat waste. Cereal-based pet food is the end point for rotten grain, and that's a quote that I have, and I'll put it up on my page later to defend myself, with two lead pet food people saying that moldy grain being used, and the dregs of the meat industry, and beet pulp fiber, corn gluten. This is the waste products of the food industry. We don't need all that beet pulp fiber. Corn gluten is the stuff we can't digest. That's why it goes to pet food. They put it in there to boost the protein. So it's just dregs from here, dregs from there, dregs to make a really valuable pet food product. And I think if they stopped doing that sort of product, grain with grain pet food, you've got to go dump that grain. And that is a mega cost to someone. Someone has to pay for that. So it's way better the producer and your dog pays for it than the poor people that make these products. So I think there's a reason with grain pet food. I mean, why don't these companies just go buy grain-free pet food companies and have at it? Because we know it's a tiny step above. I mean, it's slightly better for your pet that they're not eating copious amounts of wheat and corn. The problem is grain-free pet foods can use a lot of potato and pea, and it's still 50-60% carbohydrates. It's still belly busting. It's still got some issues, but it's a bit better than not eating wheat and corn every day. So I think the darkness that I worry about is that it's just an eagerness to sell the dregs. It's like, no, this is the most profitable way of getting rid of food waste into pet food, and that's what annoys me.
Well, it's really interesting because I started following grain industry reports a few years ago, like, the silly things that rabbit holes we go down. And most years, at least 60%, usually more, of the corn produced in this country is moldy. Oh. They publish that every year, how much of the grain harvest is affected by mold. Yeah, just follow the grain industry posts. They post it every year, and it's not just corn. They post it for all the different grains, and they even post it for legumes. So because legumes can be affected by those molds, and then we get the aflatoxins as well. So when you start looking at those numbers and you're like, okay, well, if we're producing, 50 billion pounds of corn a year or whatever the heck it is, and 60% of it is bad.
Where does it go?
What are we doing with it?
Where does it go?
Because it buried in silos underground somewhere? Is it, just left rotting in the fields? Yeah. Or is it, as we know, going into pet food.
Yeah.
And
Like,
you know, one of the big complaints that we see, chronically elevated liver enzymes. That's because the liver is trying to get rid of aflatoxins, mold toxins, and they cause liver failure.
Yeah, aflatoxin and vomitoxin.
So frustrating.
And, you know, there's a want to believe, people that are still holding on to the cereal-based pet food nonsense, the people that are holding on to that dogmatic belief in a product that has zero science to support it, zero, as much as people say there is. I was offering 10 grand for the study that shows cereal-based pet food is good for pets. But there's a belief, people want to believe that, no, it's nonsense, the corn doesn't go. They would buy good quality corn. Ask yourself, if you are the biggest producer of pet food in the US and you're making billions and billions and billions of dollars from this product, do you think that the CEO of that company would go, guys, is there any way we could buy better quality corn just to avoid any issues in the pets? I mean, the good quality corn costs $10 a kilo. I don't know, no idea. $1 a pound, you know, and the moldy corn is 5 cents a pound. Do you like there is no CEO of a mega multi-billion company in that position because they mean well. They are there to make shareholders cash, and you do it by selling more or making it cheaper. That's the only two options open to you. And if you don't do it right that year, the next guy will come in and go, buy that moldy corn, guys. It's going to save you an absolute fortune. You think that they're doing you a favor?
Right. Buy the moldy corn. We're going to spray it with something.
Phosphine gas.
We'll kill off the mold. It's all good. It's all good except for those mold toxins.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got really
user.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, whatever. So we got a little bit off of DCM there. So we only got a few minutes left. Do you have more studies there that you wanted to talk about?
No, some kind of like heart health stuff, like coming back to the heart, like this idea of organotherapy and whatnot. And I saw a couple of people kind of, it's hard to know, you know, they kind of want okay, I love organotherapy. That's like feeding organs for the benefit of organs. So, you know, a great study in the 1920s when in pancreatitis, they were studying diabetes, and they wanted to know why did pig insulin work so well to fix this issue that was kind of new to science at the time. So they got these dogs, terrible study coming up, guys. Sorry about that, but I'll value the results. And they take out the pancreas of the dogs. And one of them, they feed lots of carbs and inject them with insulin. And to the other group of dogs, they feed them lots of carbs, but feed them pancreas at the same time. And the dogs that were fed pancreas did better than the dogs that were being fed or injected with insulin. But what they found was that, you know, at the end of these 3 or 4 disgusting studies in a row, that was a kind of a mishmash of some of the studies. But by the end of it, they found that the hormone insulin is really effective for diabetes. Actually, the dogs that got it in whole form from pancreas did much, much better. So, but the problem is insulin is a product that they can sell, and so they wrapped it up. So pancreas is wonderful. It's got full of digestive enzymes and all cool glucagon and cool bits and pieces that if you know had pancreatitis or chronic pancreatitis, and you can or EPI where you're not producing enough enzymes, you can actually put in the pancreas into the diet. It's a crucial little ingredient that's not included in a lot of raw dog food, sadly. But it's the same with heart. If you want to benefit heart health in dogs, you've got a Cavalier and you're worried about the heart health. Thankfully, raw dog food companies use heart as a meaty addition. They meaty up their mixes with the cheapest parts of the cow they can get their hands on, which is tripe over here and heart. So you'll get quite a lot of heart and tripe. But if you're not getting heart and tripe in your mixes for whatever reason, go out and get some heart. Heart is full of taurine. Okay, that's the first thing. Second of all, it's full of coenzyme Q10, which is exactly what your heart needs. These are the supplements that your vet should be recommending to you should you have these heart issues. And the third tip would be,
which they say there's no proof that they help.
Oh, yeah.
They haven't read the same studies I have showing that it's actually very beneficial. But,
I'd be surprised. And aside getting them super lean, lean, mean fighting machines, as all dogs should be, these are long distance running animals. You ever see a marathon runner? It's like there's not a pick of meat on these people. It's like, how do you run 26 miles? So these are long distance running animals, most breeds. I mean, some breeds look a bit funny now these days, but so they should be lean on a high protein diet. You don't go to the gym on 50% bread. So moving to a raw diet, high in taurine, good quality fats, get off the plant oils. What are the other tips for people with DCM, Judy? What can you do?
Well, I mean, we have great studies. The one that I love to reference was in mitral valve disease, but still a heart disease study where all these dogs were in the same stage of disease and they gave them CoQ10 and without any medications added, the heart size shrunk. with high doses of CoQ10. So it was a study out of Thailand. It's actually linked in my heart disease blog, Connor, so you can find the study. But they did dogs under 10 kilos and over 10 kilos, and they did, I think, 100 milligrams twice a day. And the smaller dogs had their hearts actually shrink in size and have better contractility just with the addition of CoQ10. The larger dogs, they didn't see as much benefit, and they said, we think we just need a higher dose for the larger dogs. So, based on that, I recommend higher doses. So there's a lot of things that for DCM, like I recommend people test vitamin D levels because almost all these dogs with heart disease have low vitamin D. Again, probably related to what they're eating.
But it's heavy, huge amounts of low taurine reduces your vitamin D absorption. Yeah.
So, but you also have to test it before you start supplementing it, and do not use human supplements because you will kill your dog with kidney failure with too much vitamin D. So I always have to throw that caveat in there. Don't just start supplementing, always test. Low magnesium can be a problem. So looking at the elements in, and unfortunately, the blood is going to keep everything in homeostasis. So when you look at calcium, magnesium, phosphorus in the bloodstream, it can be really out of whack in the body as a whole. Yeah. But the regular tests that are run, so you may have to get some more specialty tests to be looking at what those elements really are in the body, not just what's circulating right at that moment. Yeah. And there are companies that can do that. So it's and looking at the diet and from my standpoint, we always say like feeds like. Yeah. So that's your organotherapy. Yeah. If you've got kidney disease, feed kidney. If you've got stomach disease, feed, or intestinal disease, feed tripe. If you got heart disease, feed heart. Pancreatic disease, feed pancreas. It's there's just so much to that. And I also like the really cool little thing that look at what the food looks like. Like walnuts are really good for brain health. And if you look at a walnut, it looks like a brain.
Someone told me that. I didn't really believe it, but apparently it's like the best thing for brains. And it looks totally like a brain.
Exactly. So look for foods that look like the organ you're trying to fix. No way. And very commonly, those foods are going to be really good for that organ. So, there's just so much cool information. It's almost like
are good studies. Food nutrition is complex, Judy. It's almost like it's got complexities that we poorly understand. It's I'm so surprised.
Yep. Except we also try to make it too complex, and it can be really simple. So we're about out of time, but Conor, I want to thank you for your time, for your expertise, for the research that you do. And for anybody who's watching this, if you have not gotten Dr. Conor Brady's book, Feeding Dogs, you need to get this book if you have any interest in how we should be feeding our dogs and how studies have been cherry-picked, tweaked, just like he was talking about with these unpublished DCM studies and letter to the editor, basically, that everybody went crazy and said, this is the truth. Conor uncovers the truth in his book. And I am just so thankful that we have you to uncover those things and publish them. Your book should be mandatory reading for every veterinary student. Unfortunately,
I have good reviews on the product on the book, thank God, on Amazon. And there's you can't help but it's like picking a scab. You go to the 1-star reviews and go, what do people So I this is the top rated. This particular bit was, and I got into the 1-star review, and there's like 1 or 2, 700 or 800 reviews, 1 or 2. You're going to get 1 or 2, and there's a vet who goes, I am a vet. Conor Brady is not. That's the start of it, and I'm like, oh. And then she says how dangerous the book is, but there was no kind of like this particular point was wrong. High carbohydrate diets are good for pancreatitis or kidney disease. It wasn't like any of that. Didn't criticize any of the points made. So if I was going to leave anybody with any of the points, it's like, there's a lot of dodgy science out there. We think the editors of the top scientific journals, that's Marcia Angel in the New England Journal of Medicine and Horton in Lancet and whatever you think about those journals now after the last few years. But 50% of the studies in those journals are nonsense. And that's the top most peer-reviewed journals. And then there's the journals that the companies own themselves. So there's a lot of nonsense out there and people will kind of panic. And I would say just listen to people like Judy. If you look back over the last 10, 15 years of Judy talking stuff, you won't pick out a subject or position that Judy took that you will find was utter nonsense based on nothing. You'll never be able, like, it's just not going to happen, because anytime somebody like Judy opens her mouth, or a few we have over here, Nick Thompson, or Becca, or any of those guys, it's coming from a position of truth and usually science. And so they start talking about that. And so it's easy to find out who speaks the truth, because you can look back over the last 10 years of what they've been talking. So when you see scientists like the scientists I just mentioned, and Freeman, and you can see their previous pieces, you can go, they work for the dry food companies. Every time they come out with a major piece, it's got major problems. I struggle to forgive those kind of pieces then. And I say, that's not good enough. So people worry about who to listen to. I think you should stop listening to fully loaded, fully kind of funded white goat vets and start listening to independent vets like Judy. And because, 10 years of just, I was looking over your page over the last 6-8 years, because I try to get ideas just to rip your ideas off and pass them off as my own. And I'm just looking through, but there's no major stance taken on anything where, it's just, it's always accurate. So people panic when they hear about the dodgy science. I love it. It's a nerdy thrill that I get, but nobody really has to worry about that. Listen to what every single blogger is telling you. There isn't an independent canine nutritionist out there writing books about dry food. There hasn't been a book written about dry food in 30 years, guys. Why do you think that is? Do you think we're all crazy? Or is every independent person saying the one thing and the fully loaded people saying the other? I would say now's the time to jump to real food. Get yourself some Judy's pup loaf there. Start off, and you'll see the difference in your dog, and then you'll start questioning. Test the dog in front of you. So anyway, that's my lecture out of the way. Just leave it on a positive note. Yeah.
Love it. Okay. So,
yes.
Heart Week continues. This is great information.
No problem.
Conor, thank you so much. I'll
see you again.
I really appreciate you. I understand you're going to a 3-year-old's
right
birthday
outside the
party.
door, I can hear them. I'm saying, please don't push that door. I'm not sure I locked it or not. Well, anyway, I'll be like that reporter dragging kids out of the room. Did you ever see that video? Oh, God. Right, Judy, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. I'll see you down the road.
Thank you very much. We'll talk soon.